The broader Me Too movement has its roots back in the mid-2000s, and a woman named Tarana Burke who coined that term to describe this idea of empowering women simply by saying you share that experience. In my view, you kind of started tech's Me Too movement. What do you think about that?
It's been hard for me to internalize that and to own it, but I do think, I'm trying to a little bit to show, like, this is what one person can do. This is what one person telling my story can do. It has this ripple effect where other people start telling their stories. So it's not all me causing this change. It's, I was one of the first, and it caused a lot of other people to tell their stories, and together all of these stories are causing people to really rethink, is the tech industry a meritocracy? No.
And yet, as I've been talking about my book and mentioning your experiences as well, people have said to me, well, why hasn't tech had its Me Too movement? Or why has the tech Me Too movement lost momentum? Do you think it's lost momentum?
I think it's still progressing. You still see people now struggling with, like, what do I do with this person who's done these terrible things, which didn't happen a year ago. But I do think that people who have had the worst experiences have not shared their stories. And I can't blame them. I think tech is even more insular than some of these other industries and more punitive. Like, you look at the people who have spoken up, and it definitely has impacted their careers.
We've seen some of the men in tech try to start their second act, whatever that looks like. Should we allow that to happen? At what point do we as a society forgive these people, if ever?
It's a struggle, because I've known a lot of them. I've been friends with a lot of them. If you've been in tech, you've interviewed them, you've spent time with them, and they're not all bad people, but what they've done has been so toxic to the industry that you feel like they do need to show some meaningful change in action and not just talk before you start to think that they are actually able to be part of the solution and not to continue the problem.
We've seen some lawsuits against Google specifically alleging discrimination against white men. So let's start with James Damore, who sued Google for being biased against conservative white males. He lost that suit. But what was your take on that situation?
It had a role in raising these issues, that there are people who believe that tech is a meritocracy, or if anything, skewed in direction against white men. I think they're not seeing all the facts and the whole picture, and and there are reasons why they don't. I mean, they have one perspective and they're not able to empathize. I think it's hard to pay a lot of attention to the individuals, because I feel like, my understanding is they're backed by organizations from the alt-right and that they're being supported, and some of those organizations are trying to feed these issues and are trying to amplify the problems that may not exist as much without their interference. So it's hard to know what's real and what's not real. It's, some of this litigation is also backed by other groups, so you wonder, like, what do people really feel, and what are people being used as part of a bigger political process? And, when I look at these companies, it's a struggle, because every company has people who are struggling to figure out what their roles are. And when you have, like, these really racist and sexist and ageist and xenophobic messages filtering through your organization, I do think companies have to be more proactive in saying, like, we believe in diversity and inclusion, we believe that everybody has a right to work here, and you need to stop it. And I think that's something that's uncomfortable in tech, where we've been promoting this idea of free speech unfettered for a long time.
You've suggested that people need to be fired in order for real change to happen. Who should be fired?
I think people who don't believe that women and people of color and people who are older and people who are immigrants are equal employees who are able to do the same work and have these innate biases against them should be fired. If you can't treat your coworker equitably and fairly, then you really have no place in the workplace.
How do we know who those people are? I mean, is this a matter of if you haven't gotten results, or if you haven't tried, or if you've made an untoward comment? Like, how do we identify the people who, aren't doing enough?
I don't know that it's really not doing enough. I do think there are people who are, saying terrible things about their coworkers, who are sharing private information about their coworkers so their coworkers get attacked by outsiders. Like, those people should be fired. There is no place for people who are enabling attacks on your coworkers in the workplace. When you say doing enough, I'm not, that's kind of hard to define. So I think, the part is, you want people who believe in your culture, and if they don't believe in your culture and they show that, then they don't belong, right? They're not promoting your workplace ideals, they're not on the same page, and they're making it harder for others to do their job.
You were CEO of Reddit for a time. You made some dramatic changes that actually the research shows actually helped cut down on hate on the site. And one of the questions I ask in my book is, how might the internet be different if more women had been involved in creating these systems and designing these systems in the first place? Do you think that online harassment and trolling would be such a problem at whether it's Reddit or Facebook or Twitter? If women had been there from the start?
I think it's unfortunate that they were mostly started by white men and run by white men for so long, and that most of the engineering teams were white men, because nobody ever experienced it the same way that people who were of color or who were women or non-binary experienced it. I mean, if you don't experience it, it's hard for you to address it. And there wasn't anybody calling attention to these problems. And you see it on other platforms too, like Nextdoor and Airbnb, who now are trying to fix problems that came from a homogeneous workforce, and now they're trying to bring in changes to make sure that their platforms are more open and more inclusive and don't reflect the biases that their early employees didn't experience.
Let's talk about Facebook. What do you think can be done to fix these issues at Facebook? It's a big question, but I know you have some thoughts.
I really think that if they brought people into their leadership team, onto their board, who were actually, part of the executive team, who were, underrepresented people of color, that it would be transformative. If they had more diversity at their executive level, it would make a huge difference in how people understand issues, because it's coming up at every major decision point versus after the fact, bubbling up, through the organization and being, quashed at various points. I don't know exactly how Facebook works, obviously, but from what I've seen in having this team at Reddit, where people were experiencing the harassment, people were deep in the product and were able to share their experiences, and that really helped us make change. Like, they understood, hey, we should start small, we should focus on like one issue at a time, and these are the issues, and this is the order that we're going to go in, and do things very methodically. I don't know that there's somebody who understands these issues of harassment and the toxicity on their platform the same way as somebody, especially like a woman of color, would understand.
Jack Dorsey recently made a new commitment to, cracking down on online harassment on the site and creating more healthy conversation on Twitter. Is that possible at this point? Can Twitter be nice, essentially, a nicer place?
Hope so. I mean, that was why I joined Reddit and why I took on the CEO role, because I thought that you could change the platform. And my hope is that it's not too late, because then where are we, right? I still use Twitter. I think it's a great way to connect with people. I think it's a great way to spread a message, but it is very hard to deal with a lot of the harassment and to see it on the site. I think they've done a better job of responding to reports. Like, all of a sudden I see that some of my reports are actually being acted on. I do think it's hard to talk about things and to continue to hear, the leadership of Twitter and Facebook talk about changes that they've made when people are really looking for actual change. Like, let's see the conversations, let's see what you're doing, let's make sure that it's not just PR.